Hello and welcome to Guides.Global. My name is John Howell, I am the editor, and with me I have Başak Yıldız Orkun, who is a lawyer working in Bodrum in Turkey. Başak, thank you for being here.
Hi, John.
Now, in this video we are going to talk about letting or renting out property. We're not going to be talking about renting a property that you are going to live in from somebody else. That's a separate video, but this is when you own a property and you're going to let someone else live in it. Okay, well, there are a number of people who in recent years have bought property in Turkey, either as holiday homes and they want to rent it out for part of the year to cover the cost, or they have bought as an investment. What I want to look at is what the legal consequences of that are and one or two of the practical issues that arise. So let's start with the legal consequences. If you own a property here in Turkey, as a foreigner, are you allowed to rent it out?
Yes, you can. As long as you pay the income tax from the rent, you can.
Yes. Now there are, however, some limitations to this, aren't there? For example, if your apartment is in a condominium, you may need the consent of the other condominium owners in order to do so, especially if you're going to be renting it out short-term to holidaymakers.
And also if you're renting out to a business, then you need the approval of the condominium.
Because the default value is that condominiums are for living in, not for business properties.
So you need, actually you don't do the business in the condominium properties, but some professions can be operating subject to an approval of the management of the condominium.
So there are one or two sort of restrictions on what you can do, but basically if you have a home and you want to rent it out to someone to use as a home, there's no big problem.
Yeah.
Okay. How would you go about finding a tenant for a property that you wanted to rent out here?
I think you should be just using a decent, reliable agent for that. Yeah.
So it'd be a regular estate agent.
Regular estate agent. There are some websites as well available, but it is more for the Turkish citizens. I don't know how it works with the different languages.
Yes.
But yeah, either website or an agent, I would say.
And as you go round the town, you will see that there are lots and lots of estate agents.
Yeah, there are many.
And some of them have more rental property than others. Some focus only on new property or purchasing property. Others do rental and purchasing.
That's correct.
And so it makes sense to use one that's experienced in doing it.
Yeah, I would do so.
Yes. So, next question is, do you rent out for a long-term contract or a short-term contract? What is the legal difference here in Turkey?
The long-term is just like we have a long-term agreement for dwellings or business places, so it is basically the proper way of like renting out your property. Short-term, actually Turkey met with this system fairly new, because we didn't have like a rental of the houses for a holiday period previously. It was only hotels and nobody was really renting out the property for a couple of weeks time. So the system is still premature, I have to say. So we don't have the legal ground for short-term lettings.
So let's just go back to long-term lettings first. So if you were renting out your house on a long-term letting, how long would you rent it out for?
I would say like more than 6 months, and a year, 2 years, up to 10 years you can let it, yeah.
And if you rent a property to somebody for say 1 year, do they have the right to then continue in the property?
Yes, they have.
Yes.
That is the more challenging thing about the long-term rental, because when you sign an agreement for a dwelling or for a business place which has a roof on top, this is the one thing that our code requires. Even you signed for a certain period, as long as the tenant pays the rent on time, as long as they're not in breach of the contract, and as long as the landowner doesn't need the property for its own use or for some special circumstances like demolishing the house totally and building up a new apartment, then the tenant can stay up to 10 years.
And when you talk about honouring the terms of the contract, we mean not damaging the property, not using it for immoral purposes, not running a business there when he's not entitled to do so, and so on and so on.
Correct. And paying the rent on time, making the increases on time, so it has to be all proper.
Yes. Now, of course, you could argue that if you're renting out as an investment, if the person's paying the rent on time and not causing damage to the property, you wouldn't want them to leave.
Yeah, why you should.
But many people are concerned about the fact that this person could remain there for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something people have to be alert to.
So, of course, there are some ways to get around of this, like a long liability, because if you definitely doesn't want that person to stay there for that long period of time, you need to get an undertaking through a notary from that person that they will be evacuating the property at a certain date, one way or another. So it's another undertaking.
So a notarial undertaking by the tenant, as it were, trumps the law. It outranks the law.
Yeah. What it says is actually this is let's imagine you have a contract and then you are making a separate contract which is just for the evacuation, not the terms of the rental, anything else. But there are some certain rules about that, so you have to ask your lawyer about the further needs and the circumstances to be addressed. But you have to do that undertaking after you signed the contract. It cannot be before that, or it cannot be simultaneously. So you shouldn't be forcing the tenant to sign that paper. You've got to show
that the tenant is doing it of his own free will.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so that's fairly straightforward. If you are renting out your property on a long-term basis, in Turkey, is it normally rented with furniture or without furniture?
I think without furniture. Furniture is the common one, but we now have availabilities for the furniture properties.
Yes, and if you're renting it out for a period of 2, 3, 4 years, does the rent increase during that time, or is it fixed?
Normally, we put the increase every year.
In line with inflation?
I think no, it's not the inflation. We have another percentage taking from the consumer, it's a very specific percentage. We call it like a UFE, it's UFE. It's like an inflation, but including some other like a percentage.
So it's like what we would call consumer prices index or something like that.
Yeah, it's something like that.
It's a measure of inflation, but it's not just the raw inflation.
So it is usually more than the inflation. So, for example, this year it was about 7%, 8%.
So the rent will go up.
Yeah, this is the actually the minimum that we would accept. I mean, if none of the party put an increase, that if one of the party then basically the landlord ask for an increase, that will be considered as the minimum. Yeah. You can put more, but for dwellings, you cannot put like a 50% or 30%. So it is then the judge will just cancel the increase amount. So it has to be fair.
So if you try for too much, then the tenant can go to the court and the court would cancel the increase.
Yeah.
Okay. In longer term lettings, can you impose restrictions on the property, such as what the property is used for? I don't mean business property now. Can you say, no, we don't want children in the property, we won't have dogs in the property? Or whatever?
These are all private arrangements, and within the contractual freedom, you can put, for example, the pet. You can choose not to have pet inside as a landlord. So these are all private conditions of the contract, and they are binding.
Yes. And finally, what about the liability of the landlord? When you rent your property out on a long-term basis to a tenant, what are your obligations as the landlord?
If there are some damages within the property due to some constructional faults or any significant, the alterations has to be done by the landlord. And also imagine that the flat is within the condominium, and when the condominium make a decision of changing the whole like an alarm system.
Yes.
So this is like a renovation which is like attached to the property. So these all going to be paid by the landlord.
So these are basically big things.
Big things.
If the roof needs to be replaced, if there are major
landlord.
repairs to the wall, all of these things are going to be paid by you, the landlord.
Yeah.
But if a window is broken, or if a toilet is broken, then that will be the responsibility of the tenant.
Correct, because the tenant has to keep the property maintained.
Yes.